it's a petition to the Fish and Game Commission that we've been working on since 2023. And this is, if I can click through, there we are. So today we're going to talk about, today's April 1st, we're going to talk about kelp history and the recent kelp loss that we've been experiencing in Monterey. This is basically focused on Monterey. And then we'll talk on next Wednesday, April 8th, about the Lover's Point urchin experiment that we did. And also on April 8th, we'll talk more in depth about the Tankers Reef project. And then April 15th, tax day, it's also a Fish and Game Commission meeting day that day. Lots going on. We'll have the current restoration effort and some evolving policy and ocean condition report that is happening. And all the dates will have uh, the the last part of it will be on the kelp restoration petition. So who am I? Why are we doing this? So I'm with the California Kelp Restoration Corps. We're a 501c3 California corporation nonprofit, and I'm the executive director. And the board of directors is Peter Ottersbach, Michelle Allen, Mary Jo Nelson, captain of the Beach Hopper, and Bruce Watkins, who is a photojournalist. He used to shoot for the California Diving News. So, kelp history. Well, in order to talk about kelp history, you have to talk about the southern sea otter because they're very much tied to it. They are the apex predator of the kelp forest, and they eat 25% of their body weight every day. Voracious appetite. They eat healthy invertebrates in a kelp forest, and they're adorable, right? I mean, everybody loves a sea otter. They were hunted to near extinction from 1741 until 1911. There used to be 300,000 of them, and they were hunted until only about 50, it's 55, but it's about 50, it's kind of a strange number, remained. And when they were nearly removed like that, the urchins and abalone flourished and ate the kelp. The way that they hunted them, they would trap them on land and using dogs and snares and stuff like that. They also hunted them in the water. And this is from the Alaska State Library. And this shows where the, the hunters would go out in canoes. And when a sea otter went underwater, someone would hold up their oar to mark the spot, and everybody formed a circle around them within the range of where the sea otter would surface. And when the sea otter surfaced, they got him with a spear or something. Also, in this time was the Steller's sea cow, which was a West Coast manatee. And there is a cartoon depicting them. They were uh, a manatee that had evolved to eat kelp, and they were really large, and they uh, ate in big herds, and they would go out and eat that kelp, and that's important for some other reasons. Uh, that they were part of this system, and by pruning kelp, they made the kelp better. They like an apple tree. If you prune kelp, it will become more productive. So that's what they were. And this is what it looked like. This is a drawing of it. Uh, and they were anywhere from 4 to 11 tons, reading the literature. So what had happened is after the sea otters were removed from the system, that the kelp was eaten by the abalone and the urchins, and they said that the abalone carpeted the bottom. So in 1911, we were going to go fight the Germans in World War I, and that was our source of gunpowder. So the U.S. was concerned that we needed a source of gunpowder, and kelp can become gunpowder. And so they went and surveyed these areas. And you can see here, I think my little mouse shows up on your screen. Um, this is Carmel, and you can see these little bits of kelp that was here. This is our macrocystis on the reef. And this is Monterey in Carmel Bay. You can see there's some other kelp beds here, and as a kelp bed here off of Monterey. And that's kind of it. There wasn't a whole lot of kelp left around for about 100 years after the sea otters were removed. And here is a map that I really like. This is a navigational chart, and it's from 1852, And then in 1882, they updated it, and basically they added the wharf over here. And what's notable about this is that the only kelp on the map is right here. Um, and what happened was the abalone fishers came. The Chinese immigrants came and they removed the abalone from the rocks. The Japanese immigrants came and they removed the abalone with hard hat diving out in these places. And then there's a lot of racial animosity in that story. Um, they were interned, and then the abalone production went to zero, and then others took over. The Italian and the Portuguese immigrants came, and they removed the abalone very unsustainably, and they harvested abalone um, from this time. And there are mounds and mounds. There was so many abalone in this region that there are roads that are paved in abalone down in Morro Bay area. And you can see how they would take the abalone and they dry them out on racks. This is actually Point Lobos. And here's the coal chute where they put coal into bins, and these are all drying racks for abalone at Point Lobos. And you can see here also, there's no kelp here at Point Lobos. But the abalone fishermen did the restoration work. They didn't mean to, but they did. So recent kelp loss. So we're going to fast forward to 2014. 2014, 2015, and 2016 was a real tipping point for kelp. And that's because of this, what they called the blob. It was a marine heat wave that affected the west coast of North America. And you can see by these temperature anomalies that this much warmer at this time. And is an extraordinary marine heat wave. And we've had many since then, but this was a big one, and it lasted for a long time, for about 16 months. And what happened to the sunflower stars in 2013 was that the population crashed. It was just before the marine heat wave, but it had a dramatic effect on all of this. We lost one of the main predators of the kelp forest. Not so much in Monterey, but up in the north coast, it was there's a lot of them there. We didn't have as many here, but that was a real problem because then the urchins that they would normally eat just proliferated. And this is how the larvae settled. So these are size classes of urchins, and this is taken in 2015, and you can see that here there are all these. The size population of urchins was in this range of being 3 centimeters. Well, that's basically 2 years old at that point. So that we know that they settled out in 2013, kind of before that marine heat wave, the blob happened. And the population of purple urchins just skyrocketed, right? So this goes to 2019. It's gotten more since then. But look at the range here. Like it's nothing, 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 and then boom up here. And this is density per 60 square meters, but there are a lot more in this range. And it happened at all of the sites around Monterey, in some degree. This is a survey of the sites that we did in Monterey for many years, and you can see how the purple urchin population is nothing at these sites all this time. And then once you reach that marine heat wave, then they all just go up. Some are more than others, but the average is much higher than it was before. And red urchins did the same thing, but it's on a different scale. There was an explosion of red urchins, but it wasn't as many as there are the purple urchins. And here's the average in the middle going increasing. So what's so good about kelp, right? Like kelp, this is an actual picture from our site, but you can take a look at that. There's a helicopter putting out a fire. And this fire was actually deliberately set by a guy who crashed into a telephone pole and made a big fire. And everybody showed up to put out that fire. There was helicopters and airplanes and firemen and everybody putting out that forest fire. But here in the ocean, at this kelp forest that we made, there's no fire service to come and service that kelp and make sure that it survives. So kelp makes oxygen. It dampens the waves that it prevents some beach erosion. It reduces beach erosion that way. If you like ice cream, you gotta love kelp because the algar from the kelp is used to make ice cream. If you like to shoot things or blow things up, gunpowder is also made from kelp, and it is full of life. Over 800 species live in a kelp forest, and it sequesters 20 times more carbon than trees, and it doesn't burn like a forest fire. It's drought tolerant, right? So, what happened in South Monterey Bay? In South Monterey Bay, in the kelp forest before the marine heat wave, we had about 500 acres of kelp in this area. And we had some over here on this site and all along Cannery Row right here. But then if you fast forward after the marine heat wave, what we have is very little kelp remaining. There's only 4.3 acres over here at Otter Cove. This is the Monterey Bay Aquarium. You got 4.5 and 22, and there's 16 and a half acres out here at the San Carlos Beach. And there's 11 acres over here at Tankers Reef. And I kind of put an asterisk on that because that 11 acres has changed over time. So it's even less now that when this graphic was made. And the urchins just spread on all of the areas close to shore on the nearshore reef. Anything that's within the 60-foot contour and up to the waterline become an urchin barren. And it spread. It kind of was in this area at first, and then with the normal currents, the urchin larvae, they spread south. They go in a 30 to 60-day larval recruitment cycle, and they have now spread all the way to Morro Bay, 100 miles to the south. And the result is that these sea otters came to Monterey. And here's a picture taken in 2023. We shot this, I think 2023, of 250 sea otters right in front of the Monterey Bay Aquarium in a big raft. And there's a problem with this is that these sea otters they just deplete everything on the reef. They eat the invertebrates and they make this place just and what they call an otter barren, where no there's no snails, there's no crabs, things like that that a sea otter would want to eat. They've kind of exhausted the population on the reef. So to summarize, we used to have these beautiful kelp forests, and we still have some, but that was our normal in our minds was that there was these giant kelp forests that were just all over the place, and they became urchin barrens, and just urchins just touching each other and eating everything out on the reef. And they ate them in these places all around the Monterey Peninsula. And the problem is that these urchin are in places that are in marine protected areas. So these urchins we are not allowed to do any work there and go and restore kelp because the urchins are protected by the marine protected areas. When they created those marine protected areas, there was no mention of urchins. They hadn't even really thought of it. They didn't understand the history of how these overpopulating native species could destroy the kelp forest. All right, so two down, one to go. This is the 2023 MPA Kelp Restoration Petition. So we've been trying to get permission to do this work for a long time. It's like a decade here of trying to get this. And we first started in 2017, and we submitted a petition to remove urchins, and it was denied. The North Coast got that regulation changed, but not us. We revised and resubmitted a petition in 2019, and that was denied too. But that was just me going there and trying to get permission from the Fish and Game Commission. Here's a picture of me in 2019 arguing at the Ocean Protection Council that work need to be done right now to protect these species. I had very short hair back then. You can't see. My wife wants to see it. She likes it when I had short hair, I guess. In 2020, we started calling urchins at Tankers Reef, and it became legal on April 1st, our anniversary, 5 years ago, for 3 years. Um, but that was canceled in 2024. I'll explain a little bit about that more on our next meeting on the 8th about the Tankers Reef project. The expansion we proposed in uh, November of 2021 was denied. And we also created a kelp restoration management permit in 2022, but that was denied too. It was denied because urchins are not an endangered species. It couldn't be affected. And there was no policy for removing the things that are affecting the thing that you want to save. We also applied for a scientific collecting permit in 2022. That was like a 2 year process. And they started out really nice, saying, oh, yeah, you can go work in the state marine conservation areas. And then over time, they kind of changed their mind and made it really small. And eventually they said, just go work for somebody else who's a scientist. In 2023, we established this Decadal Management Review petition, which I'm going to tell you some more about. And we might be able to get it this year in some form. And in 2024, we applied for a permit for a recreational airlift tool, and that was for recreational divers, and that was denied. And then also that year, applied for recreational urchin culling in 10 coastal counties, all the way from the top del Norte all the way down through Santa Barbara. They didn't like that one either. So the petition is to go into these marine protected areas and do kelp restoration. So these are the areas that we're talking about. One is the Sikilta Tankers Reef. We also are going to call that after the indigenous people called it Sukilta. So we're going to try and honor this place with the indigenous place name. And then the Ed Ricketts State Marine Conservation Area, which is right along Cannery Row. And then Pacific Grove Marine Gardens, State Marine Conservation Area, which is a little larger. And in Carmel Bay, all the way here's the Pebble Beach and Stillwater Cove over here, and this goes all the way to just north of North Monastery. One thing to note about, and also in Point Lobos, is Point Lobos, right there in Whalers Cove. We've watched that place go belly up, and so we're trying to get that done. What you can notice too is that these state marine conservation areas are designed around kelp, right? They don't go out for 3 miles. And this is the purple line here is the state marine state boundary where what do you call it? It's a 3 mile. It's like the ownership of the state. The words are failing me, but these don't go out that far, 3 miles. They just go out like this one goes out like 1,200 feet. This one goes out a little further. It's like 2,300 feet. They're just close to the shore. So these are the places we want to go: Ed Ricketts, Pacific Grove, Carmel Bay, Point Lobos, and Tankers Reef, Kilta. So who says that's the place to go? Well, there was a study that was commissioned by the California Ocean Protection Council to go and look at these places and figure out historically what is a good place to go. What places had increasing kelp uh, after the marine heat wave, and which ones had decreasing amounts of kelp after the marine heat wave. And they put little dots on a map, and regardless of conservation status or accessibility. And this place that we're trying to go, Ed Ricketts, see it's in red and in pink. So it's a priority place. Cannery Row is kind of a middle uh, priority. And Pacific Grove Gardens is a red priority. That's a place that they would like to see some kelp restored there. And then Carmel Bay, you can see lots of red in here uh, as a priority place. Point Lobos doesn't have any markings at all in it. I don't know why. I've asked the question, but I have not received an answer as to, why they skipped over this place. But that's the published report from the brightest minds, right? So what does that mean for these places? So San Carlos Beach, we are calling it Brigadier Gardens after Marge Brigadier, who's one of our favorite people, takes pictures of sea otters all the time and cleans up trash. And this area all along here is where we like to go first, all along the breakwater and all through Middle Reef in this spot. This is places where Reef Check has done surveys for years. So we have lots of baseline data of what this place used to be like before. And so when we improve this area, then we'll be able to tell the difference between over time and trend it. And then we'll just keep on going. This is the boundary of the State Marine Conservation Area, a lot of sand in here, but we'll just keep on going all down the coast here until we reach the middle of the aquarium. This is Otter Cove, and Otter Cove is a spot for where we did our first kelp restoration experiment out in this place. And there right now is a kidney shape uh, kelp forest on this spot. And it kind of spread over here a little bit this year. Actually was a little more productive than this. And we did some recon out here. We did video recon, and we were looking at this area a long time ago to see what's going on in this place. And there was sea otters that lived on that site. It was between 12 and 16 sea otters, and they basically kept that kelp alive for this time and then improved it, made it expand outward. This is Stillwater Cove. This is Pebble Beach right here. This is the 18th hole, and beautiful place. Urchins, right? So we went and in the cove is a good place to go. That's one of our priority places. There's a moorings right there that we can kind of work around. Um, and this area right here is where Reef Check does surveys, and we have baseline data for this spot as well. And we know there's urchins over here. We went and recon this, and then there's some kelp around here. And here and here, there's some kelp. This is super shallow. Like you can, when it's low tide, you can't really get through it. And there is some kelp out here. Since we did the recon of this, we've now learned that this is transition from giant kelp to bull kelp. This uh, this is going to go away pretty soon if we don't get out there and do it. I'm also noting too that this is only part of the State Marine Conservation Area where we're going to start at first. And this is another area, Stewart's Cove, we like to get to. There is a Reef Check transects out here all the time, and there was kelp out here, but that kelp is gone at this point. This recon is about 3 years old at this point. And that is the sites. This is Whalers Cove. We'd love to get in there and remove urchins. Anybody who's been there uh, recently, who has been there before, understands that these urchins just keep getting shallower and shallower in this cove, eating the kelp. And this is Whalers Cove, and we're going to go out to this point. We don't want to go too deep, but around the 55-foot contour is where we would concentrate our effort from this part in shallow. And it's only 1% of that state marine reserve. And Sukilta, which is Tanker's Reef, right? When we first set up this place, the Department of Fish and Wildlife gave us this enforcement boundary way out here, this red one. And a lot of it's too deep for us. Like we don't want to be going out there in 70 feet of water. And then we just gave up this part of it, of the reef, as a control site. So what we're asking for now is just this area that is within, it's 193 acres, and call that a state marine reserve, where it becomes like a de facto kelp restoration site and experiment forever, right? Where we can go there and test things. It's kind of a neat place for that. It's really flat and shallow. The depth is only like 50 feet when you get out this far. And it's a new site. And the harbor, why not the harbor, right? The harbor used to be kelped in. In that map I showed you earlier, you can see where there was kelp in the harbor before. And the back of the wall is actually a pretty productive site. There's lots of urchins over here, and they come in here. And this area right here has got a lot of urchins. And we'll just go through the whole harbor and See if we can get kelp to grow there. A little bit different about the harbor is that it doesn't fall into the ocean rules. So the California Department of Fish and Game does not have really jurisdiction in this space because it's considered an inland waterway, which is kind of crazy, right? There's no river feeding this thing, but like a river would be an inland waterway, but so is a harbor. I don't know. I don't make up these definitions. So what does that mean for the protected area? Well, there's a total of 545,000 acres of kelp restoration, of not kelp, of MPAs in the state of California. Some are reserves, some are SMCA, state marine conservation areas. So what we want to do is go into these Ed Ricketts and PG Gardens, and this is the acreage count for each of these places. And if you add up all the acreage, it comes to 2,410 acres that we're asking for, which is only 0.44% of the total area of all the MPAs. So just less than 1%, a small fraction of the entire inventory of protected places in California. So our proposal is to do all these different methods in these places. The first thing we want to do is culling urchins. We know how to cull urchins. We've done it before. We've proven that it works. We make kelp when we cull urchins. So we want to keep doing that with recreational divers. We also want to do baiting and trapping urchins because it's kind of silly for us to be chasing them around. Why not let them come into a trap and get in a cage and have them come and use the urchins incentives against them. Commercial harvest of purple urchins for urchin ranching. So commercial red urchin fishery uh, is usually a red urchin fishery, not a purple urchin fishery. But we want to kind of change that around and have them harvest the purple urchins for the urchin ranching effort, where we will take those urchins and put them into the urchin ranching in the harbor and grow them feed them things and make a culinary product and feed it to people. And that's food security. And the ones that are too small, we make them into compost. So there's this whole regenerative fishery that's in that commercial fishing rules. And I have asked the commercial urchin, California Sea Urchin Commission, to consider some small revisions to their rules that will allow us to do that in Monterey. Another thing we want to do is manage acid weed. There is a acid weed that has a pH of 2.6, and it's in these places. And when you have a kelp forest and the canopy disappears, you'll get annuals, and that's the annual that we get is acid weed. And it has its pros and cons. It's when the urchins eat it, it dissolves their teeth and they can't eat. Great. But it also wraps around the kelp, and then that acid turns the kelp white and it stops growing when the acid weed is around it. So you have to manage it. Like maybe bring it back from the kelp forest so the kelp has some room to plant without the influence of the acid weed. We also want to remove invasive species. There's invasive species in this place, the bryozoans, and we're looking out for Sargassum horneri, which would be awful if we had it. So we want to be able to remove that. It's a challenge because there's a whole program for removing invasive species that was never funded. And we're asking for the Department of Fish and Wildlife to do it, which is fine for a little, like one or two. But when you get to, oh, I got a field of it, they don't have any money for it. Kelp planting and transplanting. So we want to be able to plant kelp out here on these places. So how do we do that? We can put the kelp in a little sporophyte in a bag, a little goodie bag, and put the reproductive fronds in it. Then you put a Clorox bottle in there and just suspend it off the bottom on a string and a weight and let those spores just spread out on the reef. That's a really good way to do it. There's other ways too, like green gravel or seeded twine, or you can actually plant kelp that's made in a lab and you just rubber band it to the reef and it'll just take over from that and overwhelm the place. They do tiles. And it's kind of a questionable practice because what kind of kelp are you going to plant, right? So we have to have some agreement about which species of giant kelp we're going to put out there. I mean, it's all the same species, but there's different genetic modifications to this. Some of them are um, down in Mexico and in Southern California. Like, how is there even kelp there, right? It can survive, that kelp can survive warm conditions. So maybe that might be a better kelp to try and plant up here in Monterey in the future as things continue to get warmed up. So there'll be a lot of experimentation around that and trying to find the right kelp uh, to plant in the future. Kelp canopy management by pruning. So back when I was talking about that sea cow, the sea cow had evolved to just eat kelp, but now that that sea cow is extinct, what's happening is the Monterey Abalone Company has a kelp harvester's permit, and they go out there and they harvest the kelp along Cannery Row. If you look at that map, you'll see. I don't want to show it right now, but um, that kelp that remains was probably persistent because of all that pruning that happened over 30 years from the Monterey Abalone Company. So pruning is a natural way of kelp, and we want to be able to prune it, especially like late in the year after it's been productive, and have a big canopy so that that kelp um, can basically remove it before the storms come, right? The storms are probably going to tear it out. So if we can remove it ahead of time, then that'd be better for the kelp in the long run. And we also want to suspend fishing in restoration marine protected areas. And and that's kind of a controversial thing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But fishing doesn't really, it's not the only stressor on kelp. I mean, the marine heat wave was a big one, and the loss of the sunflower star and other stars are detrimental to it. But fish eat urchins. They're in their bellies, and by removing the fish, that is where the urchin barrens started in the South Monterey Bay, was where the fishing pressure was the greatest. So we just want to have the people fish outside the kelp forest. If you go there today, you'll find that there's no fishermen in that place right now because they have fished it out. This is, oops, went the wrong way. There we go. Also in our proposal is artificial reefs. There are reef structures we can put out there and grow kelp on there, which is great because you have you'll be able to keep track of where the kelp is growing, and it'll have like a blank slate to start your research. And we want to put buoys out on the water. We have one at Tankers Reef, but we need to do more buoys in more places. What we found is that the biggest challenge to doing work in the water is knowing where in the world you are. And so by having buoys that we can move around out there, we can direct people better. And also, we want to have an adopt a reef program, which is so that we can work in the place and not have someone else come in and try doing the same thing in the same place. And that can also be achieved by if we have a permit structure, which is also part of our ask, so that we are the only ones that can go in there. So to change the permitting structure, we want to add a new restoration portal within the state marine conservation area. And basically, you just kind of modify this a little bit and then have a permit that the Department of Fish and Wildlife could issue to somebody like us to go there and do the work. And that way you can keep going and not have to keep changing the MPA rules every time you have a new area you want to get into. And do something similar for the tribes so that they can have their own um, permits for subsistence and ceremonial use of these places. So what happened was we met with the fishermen and at the MPA collaborative meeting, and it was interesting. I think there was 10 against 1, and the fishers they said, I think quite correctly, that if we change the state marine conservation areas to well, first I'll start at the top. The Monterey Abalone Company said we don't want to change it to reserves because then we can't remove kelp in a state marine reserve. Well, that's a problem, right? You should be able to remove kelp anywhere where it is, giant kelp, anywhere where it is. And the recreational fishers said you can't change it from SM, the state marine conservation area, to a state marine reserve because we'll never be able to get there again. So I amended the regulation to make them keep them as state marine conservation areas as long as a permit is active. in that place, then they can't fish in there. And also tried to align the KRMP with the KRMP. So we created a kelp restoration management permit framework idea, and but the state is creating something called a kelp restoration management plan, and the kelp restoration management plan is going to have some framework for decision making, a decision tree for how um, they will allow permits to be done in all of California. But what happened was the fishermen complained again um, that they can't have it where the state marine conservation area is sometimes no fishing and sometimes it is. It would be too confusing for them. And the Department of Fish and Wildlife says that they don't want to put up a sign and try to figure it out. They just would rather not have it that way. Um, and Monterey Appleton Company still complain that they can't harvest in the reserves. But in our permit structure, we have to change all of that so that pruning is allowed in the state marine reserves. And our proposed amendment number two, which you are the first to hear about this, is to go back to the original idea of making these places state marine reserves. So the pathways to kelp restoration. So here we are in Monterey again, and here's all the MPAs all down the coast. They're spotted out. And our first way to do it is just fish. We are fishing. And we can take urchins outside of the marine protected areas. Recreational is limited to 35 urchins outside of the marine protected areas. Perhaps we can change that rule. And in the MPAs, we have this petition to allow restoration activities in MPAs. Another way it could be done as a the kelp the KRMP, the Kelp Restoration Management Plan, but that is really delayed. It's was supposed to come out in 2027. Now they're talking about implementing it in 2028. And looking at the sentiment of the Fish and Wildlife, they're likely to exclude the marine protected areas from the Kelp Restoration Management Plan. There's another way, which is the Restoration Management Plan, the RMP, which is what I first submitted in 2022 as an idea. Like I told you, they didn't want to do that, and they say it's under development, and they've never used one in the ocean, but maybe we could get one that way. And the last way here is a letter of authorization, LOA, and that is very discretionary. It's used sometimes, like if they want to do some work, we're going to go and do something on a rock jetty or something. They could give someone an authorization to go and remove everything on that jetty before the work starts. So it's used sometimes. I know the Monterey Bay Aquarium used one to fix their intake pipes, for instance. And then the objections to the process that we have is that there's just a history of a decade of denial. We've been trying to do this for so long and not been able to get permission. And really, it betrays the public and especially the volunteer divers. We went there on with our own money and time and effort and went and did this place. And without asking us, without considering what our needs were, they shut it down. That our effort at Tankers Reef. And that destroys the biodiversity of the kelp forest for the sake of the research potential of that. And the place has gone from 11 acres down to about 1.5 acres as a result of us stopping removing the urchins after they told us to shut it down. The MPA goal is conservation of biodiversity. That's one of the goals of the marine protected areas, but not suicide. And that's what's happening out here is that these places have become suicide packs where you're not allowed to disturb anything. You can fish it all you want, but you can't go there and stop the thing that is killing the kelp and the biodiversity. This petition that I just told you about, along with 9 other decadal management review petitions, Department of Fish and Wildlife did their evaluation and denied all of them. So the future of the KRMP, the Key Through Start Management Plan, the Kelp Restoration Management Plan is it's a secret process. It's not open to the public. You can't see what they're saying. There's no public review of that draft of that language until 2027. and they will not allow restoration in MPAs through that restoration management permit. And it's controlled by the Department of Fish and Wildlife as a discretionary permit. So April 21st, we have a meeting. It's Committee of the Whole. And what will happen there is we predict that the Ocean Protection Council will affirm what the CDFW, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, denied for us. They all kind of close ranks. They act as team players. Fish and Game Commission will conform to whatever the other state partners put out. That's usually how they do it. They deny them 99% of the time. They deny petitions, and they will deny changes to the MPAs that way. And maybe the Fish and Game Commission may offer us a permitting pathway, a different permitting pathway than the marine protected areas. That's what I predict will happen at this meeting. But we all have to go there and make a big showing of it and tell them how the public views this, and that way they'll offer us something. If it deny it completely, what will happen is that we'll continue fishing and we'll restore 92 acres outside of the marine protected areas. And I don't think the public is going to be very happy with the deforested MPAs. I know I won't be happy about that. And illegal, undocumented, unregulated, the IUU efforts will continue to be in MPAs. That happens with divers that are not going to swim past urchins eating kelp forest. And this would demand legislative oversight and or a lawsuit as a result of being denied completely. So we're asking for your help. The giant kelp restoration call to action. This is on our website. You can go to it, and I'll put it in the chat right here. And you can go to that. That's on our homepage, and you can learn about the petition summary. And we have a Google form. This is the main thing I want to point out to you is that you can go on this form and you can learn about a little more about the petition, and you can sign up and add your name to the list of people that are concerned about this. You can also come to the meeting on April 21st at the Elks Lodge in San Mateo, or you can zoom into it if you don't want to make the trip, and that's useful too. And we have a calendar on our website where you can see all these events, and of course you can always donate to the cause through our GoFundMe. And there we are. Join us on April 8th for a webinar on our restoration effort. We're going to go into more detail about what we've done at the Lover's Point project and at the Tankers Reef project. And then in the end, we'll make them available, splice them all together and make an overall webinar. So with that, that's the end of the questions. That's the end of the presentation.